Fridays is all about Washington, D.C. It's a special conversation for us, not only because it's where I live, it is the home of the National Building Museum, and truly a story that we want to take you on beyond the monuments and the headlines to tell a more intimate perspective on this amazing city. Future Fridays is a part of the Future Cities Initiative, which is an ongoing exploration of cities and the stories that are told from the people that make those cities their own. We could not do that without the support of our sponsors, AARP, Enterprise and Wells Fargo, Wayne and Ursula Quinn, Rooted Communities, National League of Cities, CBRE, and KPF Associates. So thank you for all of our sponsors that are making today's conversation possible. Now, to bring the story of Washington, D.C. to life, we have found three incredible speakers to tell their stories of how they are shaping the city. We will start with Calvin Gladney, the president and CEO of Mosaic Urban Partners and formerly the president and CEO of Smart Growth America. He has been a senior visiting fellow at the Urban Lands Institute and a vice president, then interim CEO of the Anacostia Waterfront Corporation. Following Calvin and responding to his story is Emeka Moname, the president of the Capital Riverfront Business Improvement District. Emeka's public leadership record includes time at the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, WMATA, and the District Department of Transportation. Then we're going to welcome Anita Cozart, the director of the DC Office of Planning, to share her story of how she is shaping with her agency DC's communities. Under her incredible leadership, the agency has completed a series of neighborhood plans, developed the Streets for People program, activated downtown's public spaces, and commenced a rewrite of DC's comprehensive plan. It is critical as a part of our conversation today that you all have a voice in telling this story of Washington, D.C. So I want to welcome you to get out your phones or to go to your web page browsers and to enter this Slido page, which will let you start to tell your story, what words that you associate with Washington, D.C. And as you all bring your voice to this story and start to populate this live Slido that your words will show up on as soon as you scan that code and start to type in, I'd like to tell just a brief history of Washington, D.C. to give some context and a little bit of the past as prologue to the conversation that we're going to have today. Washington, D.C. was established in 1790 as a compromise between Alexander Hamilton and Southern leaders to locate the new nation's capital at a central position between the northern and southern regions, expressing through the selection of place the unification of 13 colonies into one new nation. George Washington himself selected the site between the port towns of Georgetown and Alexandria at the confluence of the Potomac and Anacostia rivers, names that come from the Nassau people who lived along the banks of those rivers much longer before. Charles L'Enfant designed the plan for the capital, a grid of streets crossed by wide diagonal avenues with circles and plazas placed at major intersections. In its early years, the city actually grew very slowly. Washington remained a small town through the early 1800s because, unlike other American cities, Washington never became a manufacturing center. But as the federal government expanded after the Civil War, the city began to grow more rapidly. New row houses filled neighborhoods near the Capitol and downtown, and streetcars allowed developments to move northward. In 1900, Washington had the largest black population of any city in the country. African American communities built churches, schools, and businesses across the city, particularly along U Street, and it became a center of black culture and commerce. At the same time, segregation and restrictive housing policies shaped where residents could live. The McMillan Plan of 1901 rebuilt the National Mall and organized the monuments and museums that we all enjoy today. After World War II, new highways, suburban development, urban renewal projects transformed many neighborhoods. In Southwest Washington, redevelopment in the 1950s displaced thousands of residents. The city gained home rule in 1973, electing its own mayor and council. Today, Washington is home to nearly 700,000 residents. And beyond the monuments and the federal buildings, the city is a collection of neighborhoods, each shaped by migration, redevelopment, activism, and the daily lives of the people that live here. It is those neighborhoods and their identities as they change over time that we will turn to now as we dive into these stories from our speakers. Before I transition over to Calvin, I just want to thank everybody for sharing their words. There's a beautiful tapestry of the words that we all associate with this city, and I'm so grateful for you all to participate. You will have moments throughout our session together today to share more of your thoughts on Washington, D.C. But now, let me hand it over to Calvin Gladney to share his story of working in the nation's capital. Thank you, Calvin.
Thank you, James, and thanks for that introduction. And thank all of you for coming to hang with us on what is a cloudy Friday in Washington, D.C. I'm going to ask all of you a question. Can a city change and still retain its authentic legacy? First, I want to start with a little bit of history, and all of my story today is going to be about a particular site, 3815 Georgia Avenue Northwest, which is in the Petworth neighborhood of Washington, D.C. But before I tell the story of the site, I want to tell the story about the Petworth neighborhood. And there was a mention of streetcar and a little bit of streetcar as well. So I want to start all the way back on October 18th, 1888. A company called the Brightwood Railwood was given authorization to do streetcar on Georgia Avenue, including through what was then the Petworth neighborhood. Petworth was a sleepier part of the city at the time, very low scale, not a lot of development, and not a lot of people. Fast forward a couple of years, and there were basically a horse-drawn carriage line on Georgia Avenue. And so Brightwood bought that line and electrified the streets right on Georgia Avenue, including through Petworth. And that electrification sparked redevelopment in the area. Now, hopefully you saw what I did there with the sparked. It sparked redevelopment in the area, and so there were now additional people who could get up to Petworth in a much faster fashion using streetcar as opposed to using horse-drawn carriages. And so that was 1890. Now fast forward 66 years, and a African-American entrepreneur named Billy Simpson decided to open a restaurant, which he would call Billy Simpson's Seafood and Steaks. And that was at the location 3815 Georgia Avenue Northwest. And let me tell you a little story, both about Billy Simpson and the restaurant. So, and James mentioned a little bit of the history of Washington, D.C. And D.C. still, and particularly then, was a unique place in the country because you had both African American political leaders and folks of wealth and influence who didn't necessarily feel comfortable and have places and third places that they could go. But you also had the confluence of diplomats from the continent of Africa, so African diplomats, who also had to come to Washington, D.C., and also didn't feel like they had places that they could go and they could feel comfortable. And so Billy Simpson and his wife decided that he would really create a place where they would be comfortable. And as you see on the screen, they actually put a porcelain map of the continent of Africa on the ceiling of their restaurant to pay homage to Africa, but also to make the African diplomats feel welcome. And James mentioned earlier that the district was essentially appointed a mayor in 1973. Apparently, the mayor's first actual meeting upon becoming the first mayor of Washington, D.C., was at Billy Simpson's. It was on the second floor at what they called the Ebony Table. And so Billy Simpson's restaurant became an icon in Washington, D.C. It was a place where everybody can go and really was an important part of African American history. Fast forward 15 years, it stayed open until Billy Simpson died in 1975. And then the site remained vacant. It was a Caribbean restaurant, and then it was vacant for many, many years. Fast forward to September 18th, 1999, and WMATA brought a new metro stop to the Georgia Avenue area, and particularly called it the Georgia Avenue Petworth Metro Stop. And that was another spark of redevelopment of the parking lots around that metro stop, high-rise buildings, much more density, and much more people to a place that used to have a legacy of streetcar. And the streetcar closed actually in 1960. It was replaced by buses. 1999, fast forward again, many years later, there's redevelopment around the area, and a local advisory neighborhood commissioner said, well, Billy Simpson's, even though it's vacant and it's not Billy Simpson's at the time, is a national landmark. And it's a national treasure, and we should make it an officially a federally historic place. And so in 2009, it was put on the DC Register of Historic Places, and then 2010 put on the National Federal Register of Historic Places. And you can actually go there today, and you can see it on the screen and see the plaque. You can also see on the screen where Calvin Gladney enters the chat. And so myself and another development firm, we partnered to go after a city request for development to redevelop both the Billy Simpson site and a vacant lot that was 2 doors down. And we decided to pay homage to the history of the site, whereas other people were proposing to redevelop, maybe even knock down the Billy Simpson's building and put residential there. We said, no, 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 we're going to keep it as a restaurant. We're going to partner with local restaurateurs, the Hilton brothers of Marvin fame, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., or 18th Street Lounge, if you're more of a lounge partier. And we partnered with them, and we said, we're going to put a restaurant in the space. We're going to have it be a French bistro. And so one day, Ian, one of the Hilton brothers, was being interviewed, and they said, well, what are you going to name this restaurant? And he said, well, we don't really have a name yet. You know, it used to be Billy Simpson's. So right now, it's going to be a French bistro. So we just kind of call it Chez Billy. And the interviewer was like, Chez Billy, I like that. And the name stuck. And so on April 17th, 2012, a new restaurant was opened at the site called Chez Billy's in homage to Billy Simpson's legacy. It's on the National Historic Places, but also to make sure that the authentic history of Petworth wasn't lost, that African American history. And so the name caught on so much, and it was such a big deal, by the way, that the mayor at the time, Mayor Adrian Fenty, was there during the groundbreaking, there during the opening, and he was there with a younger lady at the time who was the council member at the time, Muriel Bowser, who is now the current mayor of Washington, D.C. They were all there at the opening, which really showed how important this site was to the legacy, and both Mayor Fenty and Mayor Bowser are native Washingtonians, so they knew, and some of their grandparents and family members knew Billy Simpson personally. And so it was really important to me to be a part of a redevelopment that kept the legacy, that paid homage. And, you know, we actually supported the ANC putting it on the historic place because we wanted to say, regardless of whatever happens to the site, we want the Chez Billy and the Billy Simpson legacy to remain. And as a matter of fact, the Chez Billy name caught on so much that the Hilton brothers opened another restaurant called Chez Billy Sud, Sud meaning south in French, in Georgetown. And that restaurant still remains there today, Chez Billy Sud, and that opened about 2 years later in 2014. So the moral of this story is all of us have agency when it comes to change. You can quote the great Sam Cooke and say change is going to come, but we can be agents of that change, and we can make sure that the legacy of our places remain authentic so that when you go there, it's not like you can be anywhere in the country, that you know that you are here. You are in Washington, D.C. You are in a city of African American history and of that legacy. And that site is an example, and the redevelopment of that site is an example of that history. And I'm just personally so proud to have been a part of that history and a part of that redevelopment. And as a matter of fact, we named the building on the second site the Simpson, also in homage to Billy Simpson. And so, as you listen to this story, wherever you are, just know that even as cities change and cities evolve, you are an agent of that change. You are a purveyor of that change. And you can do the things necessary to make sure that the authentic history and legacy of that site, regardless of the demographics and regardless of that history, can remain in kind of what you do and how you choose what you do. And you should also know that none of this is history. If you're in Washington, D.C. right now, you can go to historic Anacostia, where the winds of change are coming and are blowing as we speak. You can go to the RFK Stadium site that's about to be redeveloped and see the winds of change blowing. You can go to the Capitol Riverfront area, which Emeka leads, and you can see the winds of change. So we should all know that this is not just history, but this is a time for all of us to take hold, to grab the steering wheel, and to know that yes, change is going to come, but we can be agents of that change, and we can make sure that the history of these places remain. Thank you.
Calvin, I got chills as you were sharing that story. It so powerfully conveys the importance of place, and for people to feel a sense of belonging and identity in those places, to have their story be reflected in the places that we can go and visit and call home and speak from and convene around. And thank you, because it really, I think, was a powerful story, both of DC's story, personal for you, and something I think a lot of our listeners can probably resonate with. So I want to bring up our next Slido here, which again is an opportunity for you all to scan this QR code and reflect on what that story meant for you. Perhaps there's your own personal story or a place that this brought to, or a way that you have felt a sense of belonging in a particular area or have seen a place's identity remain even while being redeveloped and revitalized. So please continue to share your thoughts, your reflections on what Calvin shared with us and what resonates for you in perhaps your own city or your own neighborhood. While you all are sharing your thoughts and responses, I want to bring on Emeka. And Emeka is going to respond to the story and also bring in his own story and his own work, which I know there's some exciting news in, so I'm going to come off camera and hand it over to Emeka to tell us more about his great work.
Great. Thank you, James. And thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is Emeka Moname. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let me first start off by associating myself to Calvin's comments. I may have on occasion spent some time at Chez Billy, grabbing a bite to eat and maybe even a drink with my friend Calvin. So it is definitely an important and cultural landmark for the city. Which I think is an amazing and interesting contrast if you think about all the other types of landmarks we have, the Washington Monument, the Smithsonian's on the Mall, all of these fixed landmarks, which I think are typically the first things that people think about when they do think about Washington. But I work at the neighborhood level, so we're closer to the ground in neighborhoods like Petworth, like the Navy Yard, like Buzzard Point, and our cultural landmarks or our neighborhoods, they are not fixed, to Calvin's point. They do evolve and they do change. And I think that's what makes it exciting and interesting work for us and what makes for an exciting and interesting city. Calvin's story brought up two big themes for me, the issues of identity and the issues about evolution. And I'll start first with a question that I'll pose to our viewers today. Is the District of Columbia a waterfront city? Most of you would probably say no. But James's introduction challenges that theory. Even the president, George Washington, thought about DC as a waterfront city. And I want to reflect on a little vignette from my past. Back before I had moved to DC, I lived in a Midwestern city where I went to graduate school, and I was getting ready for my interview for my first job in DC that I was super excited about. And one of the people that I was speaking with had lived in DC. And back then, Airbnb didn't exist. I think I used a site like VRBO to find a place. Instead of a hotel, I wanted to stay in a neighborhood so I could get an experience in the city. And I was telling them I found a place on the waterfront, and they looked at me quizzically. Said, "DC doesn't have a waterfront." Said, "Are you in Georgetown?" I said, "No, no, no, I'm at the waterfront." And came back after the trip, explained to them where I was, and said, "Oh yeah, that place over there. That's not the waterfront." And so, I'll fast forward maybe 15 years later, once I was already in DC. There was a vision for the city that was laid out called the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative, something that Calvin worked closely on during his time at the city. And as it was being built, one of my colleagues said, "You really need to go down and see what they're doing there. It's pretty amazing." And so one of my very first trips before all the 8 and 10 story buildings were built in this neighborhood was to visit Yards Park, which the city, I think in its wisdom, required the developer to build that urban waterfront park first. And the image you see beside me is a picture of that waterfront park and that beautiful pedestrian bridge. It looks more like a work of art than a piece of transportation infrastructure. But I remember stepping onto that bridge, looking out across the water, and seeing what maybe many people, hundreds, 100 years before saw, a place for people to come to convene, to celebrate living in our city, to celebrate the water. And that piece of infrastructure, that bridge, that location continues to do that today. I walked around the entire neighborhood looking at the neighborhood we were building there, and you could start to see the seeds of a waterfront city, or at least a community on a waterfront city. And so I am thankful that I get to spend my every waking hour and maybe late nights thinking about working on partnering with people like Director Kozar, developers throughout the city to make that happen in this community. And I think that flows right really easily into this next point, or at least next view I have about our city is evolution. We talked about the fact that our fixed landmarks, like the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Monument, they are about preserving the past. Our neighborhoods are a little bit different. They are capturing the story of both our past as well as our future as we move through the present. And as we work in this neighborhood that was rebranded, the Capitol Riverfront, many years ago, almost 20 years ago now, one of the things that I've been bringing to the work, which I think parallels the conversation about Simpsons and Shea Billy, is what is a neighborhood's perception, and what part does authenticity play in that? The Navy Yard, the neighborhood that I work in, has historically been branded and held space in people's minds in ways that were not quite as flattering as I'd like them to be. One, it was an unsafe place for many people. It was a place that you did not go to, or at least you did not tell your parents you were going there. Two, and maybe a better way, it was the place to go party. People had a lot of good times that they didn't want to share with others. And then more recently, as we built sports stadia and restaurants and bars here, it's a place to go have a good time, entertain. It was a great event space. But one of the things that we endeavor to do daily is to make people feel and experience a neighborhood in the space. And neighborhoods, brands, and the perceptions of that brand, they evolve both through changes in the physical space, changes in demographics, because we're definitely look differently than we used to look 20 years ago. And it's also in terms of the feeling that people have when they're in that space. So many of you are familiar with organizations that I run called BIDs, Business Improvement Districts, or Community Improvement Districts. And we exist to support the livability and experience that people have in our different communities. I think it's very important that we are authentic. We make sure that people have an authentic engagement with our neighborhoods, not one that is a fabricated one. And so we've been leaning into how do we celebrate the history of our community? How do we identify those places that hold spaces in people's minds, like Shea Billy, about experiences they had in the past that are still relevant and still trigger positive memories about that space. One of the things that we talk about is the different physical spaces, whether it's the walk from the metro station right into Nationals ballpark that people, 50,000 people experience on 80 nights a week in the neighborhood. It's the places we celebrate in the neighborhood. It's Yards Park movies. It's concerts we do on the waterfront during the summertime. It's holiday traditions, tree lightings, pictures with Santa Claus, holiday markets that we're able to make come to life in those neighborhoods. And it's also the fact that we are not trying to make neighborhoods or community happen. What we're doing is we're creating space for communities to happen, for people to come together, people that share a physical space, they share values and a commitment to make that place safe, inviting, and fun for themselves. And so, speaking about that commitment to authenticity and identity, I'm pleased to announce and share with this group that yesterday we took a massive step towards leaning into the authentic elements of our community. We actually changed the name of our bid from the Capitol Riverfront bid to the Navy Yard Business Improvement District. I know I talk with my team, it feels like a big deal for us. And for many people, it's like well, yeah, that's what it's called, right? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to align ourselves to what is most authentic about this community to the people that know it, our residents, our visitors to the neighborhood. We want to lean into that to build community and connectedness, kind of identify our shared values. And then it's also a way for us to platform and to share with people who we really are. We are the Navy Yard. We are where DC comes to play, whether that's at a baseball game, at a football match, relaxing on the waterfront, or in the water itself, boating or taking trips on the water. So we think that, and we know that our communities do evolve. We know that it can also hold true, those things that are authentic, as it grows and develops what it wants to become in the future. So that's my take on the DC that I know, the DC I get to experience, and the DC that I love.
Emeka, I just want to express gratitude for the passion and clearly the care that you take in your job and how deeply you think about that. I think, honestly, I think there might be sometimes a public perception of the bids and it's just economic, and yet you really show this cultural lens and this emotional lens and this identity lens to your work. And I don't take that for granted, and I don't think we should, that in your position and with your team, you're bringing that really holistic view of what it means to be caretakers of this really essential spot. So thank you for the work, for sharing your story. I want to bring in some of the other comments that came in as well from our audience, because there was something that spoke to this idea that this change we're talking about today, these stories we're talking about, there's something inherent to cities about it, right? These are places we come together. These are places where we have density, and that social quality, that shared identity, which inherently is dynamic, right? Because of this social, experiment of just how we come together and how we start to share a common story, and the way that's reflected in these places. So again, for me, Emeka, and your work of really being conscientious of that social story and how you are reflecting on that in the bid's name, and also just in how you are caring for that. So that was wonderful. I want to just keep on moving because there's just so much richness to all this. And our next speaker, I think, is going to really help us look even broadly across the city, because Anita's work really touches so many of the neighborhoods and so many of the areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Anita right now to share her work and how you see this story, not just of where we've been, where we are, but also where we're going. What's the vision for kind of what's coming up next that we can all be excited about? Over to you, Anita.
Thank you, James. I'm really excited and grateful to join this panel talking about the past, the present, and the future of our nation's capital, the home of go-go music and the one and only Washington, D.C. I want to start in downtown because, like many big cities, that is a magnet for entertainment and sports and arts and theater and much, much more. Many of our 26 million annual visitors, they experience those activities, and also thousands of workers that come to downtown each day, and even our small but growing residential populations. While we have a lot of office space in our downtown, we're proud to be leading the nation in converting unused office spaces to homes for our residents. And as with many US cities, we've embraced our public realm. as an important asset for a vibrant downtown. And so we have many public spaces of note that we're proud of. The National Building Museum, in fact, the West Lawn, includes swinging tables. Chinatown Park is a gathering space that anchors that community. We have one of a kind art installations like the one that's pictured here in Farragut Park. We have Anthem Row, which is a plaza that's nestled between our convention center and the National Portrait Gallery. And it's pictured here featuring the moment in 2025 when the most people in history shared a kiss under a giant mistletoe. And as we look to the future, we're excited about a brand new streetscape that will be the front door to our soon to be modernized sports arena, also pictured here. These are places where we celebrate culture, heritage, and belonging. And as Emeka shared, we are embracing our waterfront. The Anacostia Waterfront Plan was developed almost 20 years ago, and making the waterfront accessible to all of our residents has been a hallmark of that plan. We have ambitious projects underway to complete the vision, including opening a new football stadium by 2030 to be surrounded by waterfront trails, a new sportsplex, and new mixed income housing in the years that follow. Pictured on the right, or pictured on the left, is the image of that stadium and the view towards the Capitol and the Washington Monument. That's an iconic view shed that we're excited to embrace. And pictured on the right is a view from a place called Poplar Point. It's again towards the Washington Monument in our downtown. We are excited about bringing a new large park space, development activity, and waterfront access to a part of the city that's been awaiting those opportunities for decades. Okay, so speaking of kissing and waterfronts, as I promised my panelists, I would share a fun fact about me. The bridge that Emeka introduced to you is the location where my husband proposed to me 12 years ago. And spoiler alert, I said yes. Moving on from our waterfronts, another way we celebrate authenticity is through our cultural preservation activities. Building on Calvin's story, we understand that many people hold important memories. And it includes the scale and the design of buildings along some of our historic Main Street areas. Martin Luther King Avenue, that's pictured here, is an example of one of those streets. One of the goals of our city's preservation program is to promote a sense of belonging while allowing places and buildings in our city to evolve, adapt, and change. Another tool we have is commemoration. And as we've shared, Washington is a city of monuments and memorials to important global and national leaders and events. However, less told are the stories of Black Washingtonians who have left their imprint on this city and the world. And we're working on that issue through our Commemorate DC program. In the next slide, you'll see pictured on the right is a design for an art garden that was developed to celebrate the achievements of Sterling Allen Brown, a celebrated writer and Howard University faculty member who resided in the neighborhood in and around Rhode Island Avenue. The art garden is designed to be an integral part of a broader redevelopment project featuring adaptive reuse of a fire station, a new multifamily housing, and local serving retail. So amidst future redevelopment where the buildings may look and feel similar to what you'd see in other neighborhoods, whether it be Georgia Avenue or the Navy Yard or other parts of our city, the authenticity lies and that heritage lies in the public spaces that welcome and bring everyone together. So that's the part of the story that I wanted to tell. Really excited to have been a part of this panel and to hear the kinds of things that motivate you all as the listeners and inspire you about our great city, Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Anita, thank you so much. I mean, there's a lot there, right? That's a lot of different work and projects, and you have an incredible team doing that. And thank you for the shout out to the National Building Museum. We are so grateful to partner with you on this work. And I think what I just want to pull out from that is again this desire to, there's a complexity to DC. And I think we want to move into kind of a Q&A here, so we're going to get a chance to talk about this, but there are different audiences, there's different views of this. And so being able to serve that full picture and think about that holistically is a real challenge. And I really just, again, applaud your efforts to the consideration and desire to make these development projects that aren't faceless, that respect and appreciate the neighborhoods and the context and the people they serve. So I really just want to like elevate that as a message here for everybody of here you are leading this work, and that desire that you bring to that to do the engagement. And again, we're so thrilled to partner with some of that to help everybody listening feel like they can go to your website, they can participate and be a part of this work of changing the shape of our city, because there is a lot happening. It's an exciting time in DC right now. There is some really cool projects happening. So with that, I want to move over to a Q&A format. We do have a final kind of Slido Q&A for you all to, again, scan that. And I'd love to just bring up all of the speakers onto the screen with me so we can just have a bit of a conversation now about that. And I know we'll just leave that QR code in the corner. So for all of you in the audience, please continue to ask your questions. I can see them here, so I'll bring those into the conversation as each of you share the questions that you want us to raise. I think I want to, if I can, I just want to go straight to this crux of there's something unique. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, right? The district, in terms of its purpose, in terms of its history, it is entirely unique. And I think sometimes that story and identity is this almost seen as more of like a juxtaposition of we are a federal center and we have the mall and we have our historic buildings, and then there's the neighborhoods over here. And I'm wondering if you all can help us kind of like square that together. Like, how can we think about the identity of DC in a way that paints that full picture, right? These two things are true at once. And it's a little bit almost of like a reflective kind of philosophical question, but I don't know, maybe, Emeka, I see you nodding along. So like, how do you think about this almost sometimes seen as a split identity of DC? And yet, like, how do you see that? Is that a split? Is that shared? I'd love your thoughts.
Well, I think it's very easy from the outside looking in to see the split, but we know that, especially at the neighborhood level, there's a symbiotic relationship between those two kind of personalities or half of the city. We know that people that are talented, educated, that will help us build our city or to even come work for our federal government, they want to live in great places. And so what we think about at the city levels, how do we build great places? We know that's public parks. We know that's great public realm, the spaces that we share together. It's great activation and entertainment that brings everybody together. That in turn feeds the business community or the employment community that wants to be here, some of them on the private sector to support the government, some of them completely separate from the government, but then also a large proportion of them are here to serve us, taxpayers, and to help drive our nation forward. They deserve to have a great place to live as well. And so I think the way that I square it in my mind is that it's a very symbiotic relationship between this very small part of DC that I think about and that broader national view that people have of our city.
Well, I want to pull out one thing from that and then I'll pass it to you. But there is a story across all cities of this country where previous to the pandemic, we thought about and looked at downtowns as just a place you work. And you're bringing up this conversation around these are also places where those workers live and increasingly want to live closer to that work. And I got to do a shameless plug here. Our exhibition at the National Building Museum called Coming Together is all about that, right? Which is not just a DC story. So that relationship between live and work has been transformed with the work at home culture. So that is a through line across all cities right now, and it's certainly playing out in ours. Anita, let me bring you in terms of your thoughts on that.
Sure. So just picking up on that, we found that, following the pandemic, when we looked at the numbers, the places that were in our city that were recovering better were those that had more of a residential population, like the Navy Yard bid, like other bids that just had that better mix of residential with office and with entertainment, and where we had challenges in kind of the core of the downtown that I was talking about. That's where we had fewer residents, and those places it was harder for the businesses to come back because of that shift. Just picking up on the federal point, I think that one of the things, oftentimes people, a big part of what happens in Washington, D.C. is about a debate of ideas. There's also kind of coming together of place management. And we have local place management, and there's also federal place management. The parks that I showed to you, several of them are owned by the federal government. And so it's these cooperative agreements and negotiations that have to happen about place to create the types of places you want. And while our urban parks are very different than the national parks that you would find around the country, we have to find ways to manage them that are appropriate to what people expect in a place like Washington, D.C. So having these features that represent the authenticity of the place, that is the creative challenge and the management challenge that people like Emeka and his colleagues really are taking on and winning with, frankly. And so I'm really happy about that. And part of what we're trying to do as a district office of planning is to kind of set the table for that to happen more readily, and for us to have the information and data that helps us make decisions about how to move forward with that.
I love all of that. And again, I just like to pull out words. Place management is creative. That's just a reframe, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a battleground, and sometimes it is, but it can also be this kind of co-creation. It can also be this reflective process. Anita, can I stay with you, because there's some questions coming in from the audience to the topic you raised there of there is federal land here and there is the kind of DC's jurisdiction, and the specific question is about the comprehensive plan. So maybe you want to share a little bit about the comprehensive plan work, and maybe specifically towards this question of how there's, again, a unique consideration there of the federal land that's within that plan, perhaps.
Sure. Well, I always get jazzed. I'm a trained urban planner, so I'm always jazzed when somebody actually wants to ask a question about the comprehensive plan. It really is that vision that guides land use and development in the city. We're in the midst of developing one. The end point of that is for 2050, and really understanding kind of the challenges that we face today. How can our growth and development help position us to retain our existing residents, to support our existing businesses, to grow and expand and evolve in neighborhoods, again, like ones that have been waiting for all of the kinds of amenities that you find in many parts of the city. And so that's a guide to do that. A shameless plug, dc2050.com is the hub that you can go to find out about meetings that we have, interactive activities and that kind of thing that we have on the website. Would love for you to join, whether you have 10 minutes to spend with us, or if you want to nerd out with us for 10 hours, we'd be happy and welcome you to do that. But community engagement is that cornerstone that really guides our work, and that piece around creativity really comes from the lived experience of those who live, work, and do business in Washington, D.C., and care about this city, contribute to the cultural heritage and narrative of it. All of that is a part of what we want to make sure we capture in the best way for our vision for growth and development.
That's wonderful. I just have to add like the call to action here. Go to the website, fill out the form. This is your chance. This is your voice
Absolutely.
going into a process that is just in that right moment for everyone listening right now. Tell your friends. Be a part of visioning the future of Washington, D.C. It's such an exciting moment to be able to participate in that story. Let me bring up another theme here that's coming in through the questions. And Calvin, I'm going to hand this one to you because it's a question about affordability. And I think that is a hot topic in some ways. It's a very local specific topic.
You let me get the easy one.
I thought you're up for a challenge. Well, the question is really about, we want investment, right? We want to invest in our neighborhoods. We want to help them develop and grow. And we know that can challenge affordability, perhaps. And I know I'll let you take that where you want. I realize that is a complex question, but maybe specifically within the housing lens as well, right? What are some of the ways we can help make sure the people living in these communities can continue to afford living there?
Great. So like you were saying about the comprehensive plan, no. It is a big question. I would say, as a way to think about a takeaway, you should focus on the three I's when it comes to affordability and housing. You need intention, you need investment, and you need innovation. You definitely need intention. If you let the winds of private sector development blow in whatever direction they choose and wherever capital might just flow, you will see that most of the development will be what is called market rate, which oftentimes is unaffordable to large swaths of the population that live in those neighborhoods or would like to move to them. So the first is to have the intention that affordability is an outcome of the redevelopment that the city and the market is trying to support, and to take that intention and say, well, to get there, we must have investment. And so that might require the city to help subsidize costs. So as a private developer, I know that if I develop a unit, whether that unit is a market rate unit that will be rented or sold to the highest bidder, or it's, quote, affordable, there's a base level of costs to building that, to constructing that unit that I can't change, kind of irrespective of how fancy the unit might be. And in most cases, if I want those rents or I want those sales prices to be affordable to a larger range of people, there's a gap in terms of what I need to pay, what can be paid for that, refinished unit, or what it can be rented for. And so oftentimes the city or philanthropy or other sources needs to subsidize and fill that gap. They need to invest in order to make sure that some of those units can be affordable. And when I told the story up on Georgia Avenue, that vacant site that we redeveloped into a 31-unit multifamily building, some of those units were set aside by the city, mandated to be affordable at certain area median incomes. And that was an example of both the city saying, well, we're going to state our intention. We're going to invest because we're going to put some money into the site. We're going to help you with a variety of things, some tax advantage strategies. And so we're going to invest so that we can get to our intention of affordability. But the last I would also say is innovation. Whether it's community development financial institutions, CDFIs around the country, whether it's, public-private partnership finance strategies, led by cities and partnered with private sector, whether it's philanthropic capital that is low-cost capital or is patient capital, as one might say. It doesn't need to get its money back really soon. You have to have innovation to get to those intentional affordability outcomes, because some of the investments have to happen in ways that haven't happened before, happen in ways that wouldn't just happen unless you have public, private, philanthropic, and communities partner together in ways that create new ways to bring capital to make these units affordable. So I would say the three I's off the top of my head is at least one framework of an approach.
Calvin, that was a tough question, and you crushed that answer. That was fantastic overview. That's a complex topic, and what you just laid out is an incredible, primer and introduction to these different areas that have to come together. Emeka or Anita, I just want to give you a chance if you want to add anything to that in this question of just it's affordability, and I think it's also this question of like having people continue to stay in the face of this redevelopment.
Let me take a stab. I'll just add. I mean, Calvin, I wouldn't add anything. I wouldn't take anything away from what you've offered. I would just add that you could also look at it from a supply and a demand standpoint, right? So there's the issue of the city supporting the supply of affordable housing, but there's also the demand side of it. The demand side of it is actually making sure that there is demand for the products. Like people can be employed and earn a living wage, providing them the benefits that make them want to live in that jurisdictions, good education, good childcare, good public amenities. So I think that's kind of how I think about the bid's role in this is how do we supporting the supply side, the demand side by attracting people to these neighborhoods, which then will at a macro level bring down the overall costs by providing the people that have the incomes to be able to afford it. And if you're doing that in partnership with increasing the supply of housing, the math tells you that the price point will go down and make it a lot more affordable and livable for more people.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is I was trying to think of if there's an I word that captures it. Maybe I'll think of one later. But the idea that the strategies need to be complementary, right? And that they're affordable housing of a certain type, of a certain size, may be a choice, but not a real, or maybe an option, but not a real choice for a family. So if it's not a family size unit that it's affordable, it may be affordable, but it's not a real choice. And so part of that is around thinking about what land capacity we have. That's a major question that we're confronting in the comprehensive plan. And if you have an affordable unit and you're a person who cannot afford to have a vehicle, that affordable unit right next to the metro station that Calvin helped to build is exactly what you're looking for. So location matters as well to create a real choice, not just an option. So all of these things need to come together. There needs to be the right land uses. There need to be sets of sites that are well situated and well positioned. There's also a really important preservation of affordable housing strategy, right? And a big part of that is just making sure that where there are smaller apartment buildings or there are houses that are affordable today and there are homeowners who need a little bit of support to be able to perhaps either if they want to add affordable dwelling units so that they can have a multi-generational household and still be able to live in a community of their choosing. So we need this array. Still didn't come up with an I word. We need an array of different affordable options for people, and that matters and the way that we get there is really understanding the array of needs that we have in the various different households that we have.
That's great. Calvin,
James, can I add one last thing to this affordability point?
Yeah.
I don't want us to oversubscribe or over-index on housing alone. Right. We should also talk about the affordability to small businesses to remain in the neighborhoods of a city. I mean, a lot of the challenge of retaining authenticity and retaining the legacy of places, as was told in my story, is the retention of small businesses that actually provide the type of supportive infrastructure to neighborhood residences in the area. And it also creates that authenticity so that when you go to a place, you're like, I'm in Washington, D.C. This is not just another Chipotle or another. This restaurant I could be at any corridor in the country. Like, and a lot of that isn't just the housing and the residents,
Right.
it's small businesses being able to afford to locate in sites in new buildings.
Right.
And that also requires investment, intention, and innovation to make sure that small businesses as well find it affordable to remain in the city. Otherwise, you end up with just big box, big names, franchises, and chains, and that also starts to push whether the city feels authentic.
Right. Yeah. Integrated. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with the other I that's more holistic. This is great. We are getting to our kind of final questions here before we wrap up. And I think I'm trying to synthesize some of the questions that are coming in. There's a question about NIMBYism. There's a question about how we get the word out to a larger audience than is tuning in to a program like this. And I think my own lens to that is it comes back to something we talk about a lot at the museum, which is storytelling. How do we tell this story so that people actually feel like they belong in the process, or that it reaches people that might not show up to a conversation about the comprehensive plan, but they might show up to a different conversation? And I just wonder if you all have, and I gotta tell the audience, I have not prepped these speakers for any of these questions, so this is all extemporaneous, but what is a way that we can broaden the aperture, bring more people into this conversation, and what do you see as successful in that conversation starter or that entry point to bring people into feeling like this work is for them, it includes them, and that they belong in the process of what we've talked about today? I will just toss that in the air for anybody to grab. Go ahead, Anita.
So I'm happy to start. One of the things that we've been doing across our work at OP is just going to where people are already, right? So if there is a Ward 5 Day, there's an Anacostia River Festival, there's a Rooting Communities Festival this weekend, there's all of these places we go and we sit down and we're at a table and we do have a story to tell, but we also want to hear what other people have to say in response to, and just walk by and say, well, what is the Office of Plan? Well, what does that mean? And what's that about? It's being in dialogue with people. Another approach we take is walking tours. And sometimes they're walking tours on a project that we have a specific milestone that we're trying to achieve. And sometimes it's just a walking tour of a neighborhood to demystify language that we use about scale and massing and bulk and what does the zoning commission do. Like we can walk and talk through a neighborhood about what aspirations people have and what does it mean and what's being developed right there, right? The other thing we do is focus groups, and that's where people can really sit down with us with a small question prompt and really talk through aspirations that they have and ideas that they have, things that they may have seen in either other places that they've lived or other ideas that have come out in different parts of their lives. So those are some of the ways that we really try to broaden the conversation, and even participating in forums like this one. So thank you again to the Building Museum for that.
Yeah.
Let me piggyback off that. I think we lean into the same things you do at OP, Anita. We also bribe people. So we give them food, we give them swag, we give them things to get them to show up to the things that we're doing. So we do, in our neighborhood at the very hyper local level, we have this summer concert series that we put on, and we make sure that people leave with things that connect them to our community. We have a movie series. We actually partner with Audi Field, and we show movies on the pitch. We call it Movies on the Pitch during the summer, where people can come out and experience a sports stadium in a different way and have a different connection to it. That's our entry point to get them to have a broader conversation. One of the things I say about neighborhoods is the neighborhoods that you like didn't happen by accident. They were incredibly intentional and thoughtful. And so once people start to understand that they can be a part about that intentionality, they can get energized about that. So, I mean, kudos to Anita, Calvin, your part in city building, neighborhood building. But I tell people, this nothing that you enjoy happened by accident.
Omega, that is a perfect final line to end on here. I think that really encapsulates. I just want to take a moment and thank all of our speakers for your work that you do, for bringing that story here, and for caring so deeply about this. So thank you to the speakers. We're going to pull up one last screen here because part of what we're doing at the National Building Museum is also wanting to give all of you a voice in this. So we have built an online platform called I Hope This Becomes. You can go to ihopethisbecomes.mbm.org to enter your story of what you remember, what you love, and what you hope for the future of the places that you care about. I think part of that entry point that we were just talking about is caring and reflecting on how the spaces around you are shaping your quality of life. They're shaping your everyday experience. So this is an opportunity for all of you to contribute to a national map that is telling the story of the built world through the Future Cities Initiative at the National Building Museum. I just want to again thank all of you for participating, your voice in this. Stay tuned. Our next episode is about Los Angeles, so we'll be coming back to you here on YouTube to hear more stories of these cities across America that are unfolding before our eyes and are all opportunities for you to participate in telling your story in the places that you love. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and happy Future Friday.